Ok, bienvenue pour cette seconde partie de notre après-midi de travail. Alors, la tâche est facile parce que sinon je ne sais pas comment on commencerait. Il y a tellement de questions qui se pressent pour la discussion, mais on va démarrer par les questions qui ont été posées par les deux discutants ou les enjeux qui ont été soulevés, de la sorte qu'on va pouvoir maintenant redonner la parole à notre orateur principal, Boaventura De Sousa Santos, pour l'entendre réagir aux deux interpellations de Jean de Minck et Maria Angélica Sánchez Álvarez.
Thank you very much. There were two excellent comments, and with Jean de Minck, whose work I admire so much, and we have so common concerns that I understand very, very well, his questions, which in fact are my questions. So it's not surprising that we have this disquietude in light of recent developments, and do not know very well where things are heading to. I usually think that, claim that sociologists are very good at predicting the past, never to predict at predicting the future. So we don't know what's going on. But one thing happened, and I think that Jean de Minck made that very clear, and I fully agree with him, that starting in the 1990s and so on, we can see that the concept of sovereignty changes. Probably it's not a dramatic change, but it has a more expanded and generalized form of expansion of sovereignty in such a way that ceases to be an unconditional type of right, as self-determination was unconditional. So self-determination in the beginning of decolonizations at the United Nations is a famous resolution 1514, December 1960s, makes very clear that the countries, the colonies, do not have to wait to be in good conditions to become independent. So the self-determination is an unconditional right. And so therefore they should become immediately autonomous, independent, and so on. So it was an unconditional. Sovereignty was related to that, was an unconditional type of right. Well, from then on, it's going to be a conditional right. And I think that's the problem, that it becomes sovereignty which was constructed basically vis-a-vis foreign powers, non-state powers, starts to be analyzed in terms of the internal properties of the sovereign. And therefore the state sovereign becomes more conditional. It becomes more conditional for several reasons. One of them is the change from taxation to debt. The states, if they want to perform their functions, have not available anymore the possibility of taxation, because neoliberalism is going to put a stop on that. And we know that after the Second World War, I mean, the richest people in our continent would pay 70% in taxes or more. Now it's impossible, and therefore the countries the states go to the international market, in which they are not sovereign. So sovereign debt is an oxymoron, because it depends on agencies, rating agencies, and so on and so forth. So sovereignty begins to be internally worked out, and in such a way that imperialism is going to be a way of hollowing out the idea of sovereignty, to the point of reaching, for instance, the concept of failed states. A failed state is a state that cannot even afford to be sovereign anymore. But when we look at the countries that became failed states, they were made failing states. So they were made failed states. They were not failed states. I mean, if you look at Somalia, if you could even Ethiopia during a period, these or Darfur with Sudan and the crisis in Darfur, they were made fail failing states because of the intervention, because of the UN intervention, because we have this not only in many countries from then on, we have really, and Jean, you know that better than I do, you have, the United Nations coming in East Timor, and they have part of the administration is by the United Nations, which of course ruled East Timor as if it were Portugal or another Western country. And then we are doing at this present time a very good research project, I think. Two of my colleagues are now in East Timor, to see this disjunction between the United Nations rule, the Australian pressure because of oil, and then the Indonesia heritage, because they were there as a colonial power, the Portuguese colonial heritage, and the traditional legislation. So that's what I call in a paper that some of you may have read, the heterogeneous state, because it has circulated very very widely. It's the idea that the states, in fact, are a palimpsest of different juridical and political cultures, very often. And there you can see, I mean, this is the assembly of the heterogeneity of the state. So I agree with that, and I think that from my view that was under the guise of new rights of intervention, the idea that we have to promote human rights and so on, it was in fact a way of intervening, of destroying the sovereignty, which was very important for neoliberalism. And I think that these new forms of constitutionalism, we are going to see this superimposition, which at present time is a huge conflict, as you precisely highlight, between the global constitutionalism of the multinational corporations, because what are the treaties, the free trade treaties? They are protocols for the protection of investors, basically. I mean, that's what they are. If they were something else, we could be even in favor. But now you are in a situation in which someone on the left, like myself, finds himself in agreement with Trump against the transatlantic partnership. But for very different reasons. I mean, because in fact for us is because they are a Trojan horse to destroy the social protection, the environment protection, the autonomy of the states in Europe, because of the judicial arbitration and so on. So we know that our reasons. His reasons seem to be different. It's to protect the American markets, protect the American workers, and so on. That's the rhetoric. I don't think that the true rhetoric, the true reason is a different one, and I'll get into that. But in any case, we are at a juncture in which, and this is a problem for critical thinking, that many things that we have been against too, now we see extreme right and rightist forces against. I mean, the extreme left, sometimes they say the extreme left and the extreme right touch each other. I'm not an extreme left, but even a leftist government and leftist attitude now, which was against, for instance, this free trade, finds itself sometimes in a difficult position in order to distinguish the trade. We were very clear, for instance, with NAFTA. The free trade agreement with Mexico. Why we are against with NAFTA? Well, it was not they used to say all the movement in Latin America against that treaty, and later on against ALCA. Well, we are against basically because the workers' rights were not safeguarded. Because the idea, as probably you know, the free trade agreement did not include the workers' rights, because that was the purpose. I mean, the American companies wanted to come down, and while they pay $20 an hour in the automobile industry, in Detroit they pay $5 an hour in Mexico. So they didn't want to put the equality of rights and the safeguards of the rights of workers and labor courts and so on in the treaty. That's why they are in a non-binding annex, and that was the fight. Well, we were against because of that, because it was the end, was the destruction of Mexican economy. The Mexicans had even to change the constitution, things that came from the Mexican Revolution in 1910. The ejidos, the communal land, it has to be privatized because it was against NAFTA, against the treaty. So we are for these reasons. But now we see Trump against NAFTA. Does that mean that we are with Trump? No, we are not with Trump. And the reason why we are not in Trump is the following, is that the imperial powers and the imperialism in the North has always been like that. So this is not new, John. Is that they impose a law, they impose a norm, whenever they consider it to be favorable. And they do that in the name of universal rights. Whenever the reality of that norm does not suit them, they withdraw. And they withdraw unilaterally. That is to say, the United States first destroys the economy of Mexico. For 20 years, they are destroyed. At the end of this period, they consider, well, after all, this was not so beneficial for us. So we withdraw. So the imperial powers have this right to impose and to withdraw whenever they want. This is the inequality of power in international relations. It is true, the Washington Consensus is being reworked out, and I think there are think tanks that are precisely in this, doing that, and we have some hints where this is going. And because this is again in a transition, there are contradictions there between the Trump and between many others. And the guys that are trying to mediating this basically this transition is a conflict between those that do not want to question in any way free trade, Silicon Valley, the people from communication, Facebook, etc., and the people in industry, the remnants of industry, that in fact think that it would be better to have jobs back, right? Which will never come, because that's the trap. The Ford company agrees with Trump not to invest in Mexico, not because they want to hire more people, is they are going to replace by robots, because they have a very large program of robotization of all the industries. So there will be no employment anymore. So it is that. But there is this division between these guys that get to power through the rhetoric of redressing the poor white worker that was left behind, through the promotion of massive false consciousness. That is to say, you never mention the real causes of the problem, so that the victim can turn against the victim. That's why in Europe, the Europeans, poor Europeans against refugees, in America, the white workers against the Latin workers, yeah? And they are the enemies. So this is false consciousness in pure sense, and Marx system. So I think that that's precisely what they are doing. Who is mediating this is Goldman Sachs. That's why it is so prevalent in the administration. They are there to see which direction it goes. What do they say, basically, today is that the reason why the consensus, the Washington Consensus is in crisis is because it is too broad. Because now the concentration of the important multinational corporations is such. The important corporations now around this, you probably know that group in Zurich that did the concentration of wealth and the connections in world trade. There are 50 companies. And these 50 companies have their own interests, which are not the same interests as many other countries. So other companies. So now the struggle, it's interesting because this struggle now is absolutely anti-political. It has nothing to do with political, for the political in their argument now. The discussion is how the multinational corporations, the most important ones, like, of course, Microsoft and Facebook, the ones that are in the front line, how they are going to promote free trade in such a way that gives them more privileges and leaves the other behind. So they really don't want to be mixed with all these other companies, Walmart particularly, even though Walmart is one of them. But they are trying to do that. How do they are going to do that? Is to the new slogan of international trade, protocols and standards. So they are reworking. They don't want rules. They don't want the WTO, because WTO, after all, each country has a say. Not much, but formally they have. They're nothing of that. They are really trying to develop standards of international trade and protocols that if you don't join in, then you are out. But you are voluntarily joining him. So nobody is forced to do anything, and everything is technical. So this is the end of the law, in a sense. And for them, as they say, it's the end of international law. It's a different landmark. But I think that is not the end of free trade. It's a more selective form of neoliberalism. That is like the Internet. Internet 2.0, 3.0. That is to say, there is neoliberalism for all. There is a neoliberalism upgraded for financial capital, and a very upgraded form of neoliberalism for the companies that win most of it, the ones that are in the front line, the most innovative. That's why he's always talking about innovative. He calls them to the White House. So I think that what you said, that from the 1980s, the North does not ignore the South in terms of law. They never did, in fact. I mean, the colonial is very interesting. Of course, there was law in the colonies, but it was the colonial law. And we have two kinds of indirect rule, and I think they are, again, surfacing. There was one indirect rule, which is the remnants of which we know are the people, the traditional authorities and the traditional chiefs. The British were very strong, the Portuguese also, in things that didn't matter for the colonial domination. Well, the chiefs could solve the problem: family problems, neighbors' problems, sometimes land problems. Indirect rule, that was the name. Well, now, of course, there was always a different indirect rule. The rule of the majestic companies, you know, from the 17th century onwards. All the majestic companies, they have judicial power, they have police power, military power throughout. So it was another kind of indirect rule that the state. Now I think that we are leading to a new form of private indirect rule. But this private indirect rule are the standards and the protocols that are being designed by these companies. And they are the ones that are going to decide the fate of Trump. Either Trump adapt or he'll go. He'll go in one way or the other. So and he has seen already that he is a lame duck very early on now. So it is, I think, but your critique, yes, I agree with you. I fully agree with you, and we just don't know how the situation is going to take the main direction. As far as Maria Angelica, well, as I say, the first question. So Angelica is concerned about whether issue in my book Toward the New Common Sense, in the English version. The last chapter is Can Law Be Emancipatory? So in that, I was trying to analyze under which conditions law can be used by social movements, by progressive causes, by NGOs that are trying through legal reformism change the things for the better, right? And in fact, I use Colombia as a very good example because after the Constitution of 1991, we had, for instance, the beginning of what later on came to be called the intercultural jurisprudence of the Constitutional Court, the indigenous rights, the recognition of the culture of indigenous, and so on and so forth, with judges, fabulous judges like Ciro Angarita and even Carlos Gaviria in his first phase. So I think that at that point, it was very clear. In my studies, and is a more recent book I can then because it's in Portuguese, but it's now coming by a call in Spanish. I can give you the reference of that, in which I analyze how the movement of the landless in Brazil use law. So at the beginning they were Marxists. They said law is fascist, law is capitalist. We cannot use courts because courts are capitalists. So how could they ever decide in our favor? But then later on, thanks to a new breed of popular lawyers, as they are called in Brazil, young committed lawyers that are interested in progressive interpretations of the law, managed to be successful in some court cases. And in fact, I did that work with a student of mine who is a popular lawyer herself, Flavia Carle. And so we will study, it's already in Portuguese, published in Brazil. The book is called Bifurcações da Ordem, and it'll be Bifurcações da Ordem, quizás in a car. You know, the problem is to see today the following. And for that, I'm working on an answer, but I don't have an answer for you today, because I'm really working on this. Is this, and the question is this: if in fact we accept that the abyssal line goes on, so when I formulated the law can law be emancipatory, I was thinking solely on the other side of the line, the line of regulation and emancipation. So the metropolitan forms of civility. What is the role of law in the forms of colonial civility or uncivility, which I call social fascism or uncivil civil society? I tend to believe that law there can't play a very minor role, and it will never be the state law. I've been, so I can, if you are interested in this, I can direct to, I wrote a piece on the Indignados law, the law of the Indignados movement. Is in a first shrift for William Twining. If you go to my page, you can get there. Is that the young people were very much against this idea that law can be emancipatory, but they themselves, when the areas were occupied, they decided to create some laws, what I call prefigurative laws. Then bring in the case of the Zapatistas. You're solving the caracoles, juntas de buen gobierno, we have laws. I'll take you to the commune of Oaxaca, 2006. You have laws there that create. For 6 months, Oaxaca had no government, but there was no crime almost. So how come? And now we have Rojava in Syria. The Kurds have a community, a stateless society, which is governed in different ways. So law uncoupled from the state. That's the idea. And this goes back to the idea of legal pluralism. And the second one I'm not joking. I'm saying that's my standard question when I bring the legal pluralism issue, is that you romanticize legal pluralism. I never do, because my work does not allow me to doing that. I mean, southern part of Italy is the idea that, you know, if you have non-state legal forms, then they are more progressive than the state legal form. Not at all. I mean, you go to southern Italy, mafia is legal pluralism, but mafia law is much less progressive than Italian state law. So we have to analyze and make judgments. The point is that you cannot transfer that to Africa and say that all the traditional justice is mafia law, because when you need the most honest people are really doing that justice, so it's different, right? Or the indigenous people we have in the project that I just finished, we have lots of cases and communities with indigenous justice in Ecuador, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, basically, in these two, with different communities in the Andean region and the Amazonian region. So, of course, the armed force, even in the case that you are mentioning, this is a debate. For instance, the people, the region that I know best, in the Cauca region, what we see are two forms of legal plurality. Is the state, which is very much absent in many ways for resolution of disputes. Then the indigenous people, sometimes, as you know, in Cauca is very much mestizo, campesinos, indigenous, and they have their own ways of solving the disputes. The courts go on. The popular courts, they don't call, they call sometimes called cabildo, sometimes have different names. They go on. And then there is the paramilitary groups. And then we have all the people in sociology of law have, if this is a limit situation, I mean, execution, without any process by the paramilitary. Is this law, or is just the external to law? Well, the guerrilla sometimes did that. We had in a project, since you are from Colombia, read our book Kaleidoscope of Justice in Colombia, so you can see how the guerrilla conducted. Rubio wrote that beautiful piece, that for the problems inside the liberated zones, the guerrilla relies on traditional justice, very restorative, very mild, no punishment, no service to the community. But whenever they are trying a traitor. Someone that betrayed them to the officials is summary execution, basically. It's revolutionary courts. Revolutionary courts are a few words by the commandant, and then you shoot them. I've seen that in other parts, not there. So it's different. But I think that we have to distinguish. Mm-hmm. We are at a time in which you don't have very good terms to designate the different objectives. Mm-hmm. There was a time in which we had communism or socialism and social democracy. Now we have the adjectives: good legal pluralism, bad legal pluralism, radical democracy, liberal democracy. So abundant in adjectives and scarce in concepts. But you understood very well the problems, and thank you very much for your questions.
Okay, do you want to add anything to this, Jean et Maria-Angélica? Si, Maria-Angélica?
La dernière question sur le procès de paix.
Oui,
de paix.
Effectivement. Donc, il y a une dernière question qui avait été posée sur la viabilité d'un accord de paix.
I forgot completely. Me esqueci de me olvida. Não porque não queria. Has visto este texto que publiqué sobre la paz neoliberal, la paz democrática en Colombia? Esa es mi respuesta. O sea, well, no, I think that we have been working in this peace process with two concepts. One is the neoliberal peace, and the other is democratic peace. The neoliberal peace is the peace that is favored, I think, by the government and even by Uribe when he was president. Is the idea that you stop the war and nothing happens. So you don't have to care about peasants, agrarian reform, or whatever, because finally the country goes on as freely as it could. While the democratic peace is the peace that is concerned with the conditions for the post-conflict. Mm-hmm. What is going to happen? What were the causes of the guerrilla? Mm-hmm. Are the causes going to be addressed? Because after all, why was there guerrilla in Colombia? Because, first of all, the democratic process didn't work when they assassinated Gaitán. Mm-hmm. That was the beginning. If they are assassinating our leaders, all the democratic leaders, then there is no possibility of democratic process. That's why they went to the Monte, no? Mm-hmm. to the guerrilla. The second one was agrarian reform. And they were not very poor people. Marulanda was son of a middle-class peasant family. I mean, I've met other guerrilleros now in prison from LLN in Bella Vista, in Medellin. They were, middle-class peasants. They have some land, but they felt the injustices, and so was the agrarian reform. Are we going to have an agrarian reform? Mm-hmm. Or as the people fear that, Santos, what he wants to be the peace is the neoliberal peace, mm-hmm. get rid of the guerrilla, mm-hmm. so that the multinational corporations come next day. So the peasants now, in regions dominated by the LLN, mm-hmm. are asking the guerrilleros, because they didn't leave yet, mm-hmm. who is going to protect us after you leave? Mm-hmm. Because they are really afraid, mm-hmm. and nobody is going to protect them. Mm-hmm. Because the idea was that these would be called reservas campesinas, mm-hmm. so 10 million acres that are, allocated mm-hmm. for that. But now, because this is going to force some transformation in the economic structure of the country, mm-hmm. the Uribistas don't want that, the paramilitary don't want that, and that's why they are assassinating all the people involved in the peace process. Mm-hmm. So I think that only a constitutional assembly probably, but would be one condition. The second condition would be that all the American imperialism would be, expelled from the country, as Bolivia did with the AI and so on. As long as all the military... There was a friend of mine, this is an anecdote for you, because she was in Cartagena, the time of the peace process was mm-hmm. signed. Mm-hmm. And so all the military, the American personnel were so worried about the peace. They didn't want the peace anyway, because it's the end of business. I mean, mm-hmm. who is going to sell the weapons? Who is going to have all these positions in Colombia? All the contractors, they make lots of money with the war. War is a great industry. So now they are happy because there is, they are doing everything not to have. So imperialism out. That would be the second one. And the third, the Constitutional Assembly, because one of the, if you read, if you read, or probably you read, the document of the FARC, which is a remarkable document, 300 pages, in which we have a blueprint of a new society. It's very interesting. I rarely see papers with that quality. What is important is that the guerrilleros will, as they did before in the 80s with Unión Patriótica, they will become politicians. And they even have already slots, curules, assigned to them. So they are going to be members of the parliament. In order to be members of the parliament, we have to consider them that they were not criminals. Because how can the public or the television portray someone as a former leader of the guerrilla, now is your deputy for a party? If I start from the idea, as Uribe, that these guys were common criminals, delinquents, then this is never going to happen. So we have to have a constitutional assembly that would create respectability to these people, otherwise they are going to kill them. And you know, in a few months, 1,500 leaders of the Unión Patriótica were assassinated. The same thing is going to happen. And if you talk to them, they know that this will happen. And I don't think that Santos, the paramilitary, are telling Santos, don't think that you are going to protect these guys, because even now we can shoot them. In Antioquia, the situation is dramatic, and it's the land of Uribe. I don't know if this is an answer, but it's...
OK. Jean, Annie? Non? OK. So, on va ouvrir alors le débat à les questions qui se présentent à nous. Qui veut démarrer dans la suite? OK. On est... Philippe, oui? Alors,
je vais me dévouer.
On peut peut-être se présenter chaque fois.
Ah oui, je suis professeur de droit économique international et de philosophie de droit ici à Louvain. Et je dirige d'ailleurs la thèse de Marianne Guilka. Et donc je suis très content qu'elle soit intervenue aujourd'hui. Je souhaiterais avoir une clarification sur le débat sur le constitutionnalisme. Il me semble que de la même manière où on peut distinguer la souveraineté formelle d'un État par rapport à sa souveraineté réelle, c'est pas tout à fait la même chose. Par exemple, au sein de l'Organisation mondiale du commerce, les États sont tous considérés comme également souverains, mais il est très clair qu'il y a des luttes politiques pour imposer son système juridique. Et un des effets de la mondialisation, c'est effectivement que les systèmes juridiques sont entrés en lutte et qu'il y a des violences pour pouvoir imposer son système juridique. Donc, en matière de droit des brevets ou de copyright, etc., c'est très clair qu'il y a eu une lutte acharnée entre les systèmes anglo-saxons, le système américain et d'autres systèmes comme nos propres systèmes européens. Et donc, il y a une différence très nette à faire entre souveraineté formelle des États et souveraineté réelle. Mais de la même manière, à propos du constitutionnalisme, il me semble que les juristes analysent les droits immédiatement sous l'angle de la reconnaissance procédurale possible de ces droits. Ce que ne font pas, en général, les philosophes politiques ou les sociologues du droit. Ce qui les intéresse, semble-t-il, c'est la reconnaissance de droits, mais la reconnaissance formelle de droits. Et ce qui est intéressant chez les juristes, c'est qu'ils se demandent toujours à quelles conditions un droit peut être reconnu. Et donc, dans la constitutionnalisation des droits, notamment au niveau international, on peut voir la question sous l'angle de, j'en parlais avec Jean à l'interruption, est-ce que l'OIT va ou peut ou a établi un document reconnaissant la clause sociale en matière d'échanges économiques internationaux. Alors, une autre question, c'est de savoir qu'est-ce que ça vaut, cette reconnaissance, effectivement, devant un juge. Quel est le juge qui peut appliquer cela? Et on voit très bien que le juge de l'OMC, à beaucoup d'égards, est complètement incompétent pour décider que la Chine ou l'Inde ou les États-Unis ou que l'Europe ne respectent pas certains droits fondamentaux. Alors, l'OMC, dans une déclaration déjà ancienne, en 2001, a dit, écoutez, tout ça, l'OIT va le régler. Et donc, le débat sur la constitutionnalisation des droits me semble quelque chose de très symptomatique de deux approches très différentes entre la sociologie du droit, la philosophie politique et le droit lui-même. On peut reconnaître des droits, mais ça ne signifie pas du tout que ces droits pourront être appliqués en l'espèce. On a une multitude de droits qui ont été reconnus, mais qui sont inapplicables en l'espèce. Et ça me pose une question. Outre le fait qu'au niveau de la constitutionnalisation des droits internationaux, au niveau international, c'est aussi la question de l'universalisation des droits. Par exemple, la clause sociale comprend traditionnellement l'égalité de traitement entre hommes et femmes, ce qui, dans nos droits européens, n'est pas du tout une question réglée. Il y a une discrimination encore patente, la liberté d'association, mais également, par exemple, le non-travail des enfants, l'interdiction du travail des enfants. Alors ça, c'est très intéressant, parce que lorsqu'on propose de constitutionnaliser des droits, et disons, ça, c'est l'évidence, l'interdiction du travail des enfants, c'est une question d'ailleurs qui avait été soulevée au moment de l'entrée du Portugal dans l'Union européenne. Mais alors là, les Indiens disent, écoutez, vous les Occidentaux, vous voulez nous imposer cette norme universelle, mais c'est vraiment du protectionnisme déguisé, parce que vous vous en foutez de nos enfants. Si vous vous intéressiez à nos enfants, vous n'indiqueriez pas dans un traité l'interdiction du travail des enfants, vous nous donneriez des budgets pour créer des écoles. Parce qu'interdire le travail des enfants, c'est une chose, mais s'ils n'ont pas de scolarité, qu'est-ce qu'ils font? Ils jouent aux billes dans les décharges toute la journée. Donc voilà, ça me semble une différence de perspective très intéressante sur la constitutionnalisation des droits. C'est est-ce que lorsqu'on accentue cet aspect-là de constitutionnalisation des droits, on ne fait pas comme si ce qu'on essayait d'obtenir était déjà obtenu, alors que tout reste à créer, notamment les voies procédurales qui permettent effectivement de concrétiser ces droits. Merci.
Nous pouvons ajouter d'autres questions.
Qui souhaite enchaîner? Oui. ¿Quién estás? Como,
Sí, puede.
como quieres.
Como quieras.
On peut traduire.
Lo más
Mejor
comportado.
en castellano para explicarme mejor. Soy Gabriela Bernal, vengo del Ecuador. Estoy haciendo un doctorado aquí en Lugano. Usted había hablado, profesor, sobre las transiciones eternas, esas del colonialismo. Me gustaría saber, usted que ha visto desde una óptica diferente, ¿qué papel ha jugado en países como Ecuador y Bolivia la declaración del Estado plurinacional en estas transiciones de larga duración en relación a la colonización? Porque a simple vista pareciera ser que no ha pasado nada. Y entonces me gustaría tener una... a la final yo tengo la percepción de que la legalización de este tipo de términos ha invisibilizado completamente debates que deberían estar mucho más presentes en la sociedad.
Donc la question porte sur les situations d'États plurinationaux au sein desquels l'enjeu qui est soulevé ici est celui de peut-être une invisibilisation des enjeux qui auraient dû être traités, mais qui, sous couvert de ce label, n'ont pas été assez visibles.
Oui, ce qui se passe, c'est que je pense que quand les choses prennent la loi écrite, ils sont invisibilisés parce qu'ils sont dans la loi et tu ne peux pas parler plus. C'est dans la loi, oubliez.
Et peut-être tu peux utiliser un exemple, peut-être ce serait très concret.
Et bon, je parlais sur ce que je travaille. Je travaille au champ de l'éducation. Oui. Et dans la loi, ils ont fait la loi d'éducation interculturelle, par exemple, mais ils ont effacé tous les processus que les peuples indiens ont fait dans les 40, beaucoup plus peut-être, avant. Il ne reste rien sur ça. Mais sur la loi, ils disent qu'on a l'éducation interculturelle. Mais dans la pratique, n'existe plus.
Yeah, well, I can, other people, but you can ask this to the first question to our professor, our colleague here. May I speak in English? I have to train my French also, but it's better. Well, I think that you are right in the terms of the procedural fetishism of lawyers in the recognition of rights. But I don't think that the debate today is so much between the distinction between formal and real sovereignty of the state. I think the political debate, as I see it emerging now, is that the state sovereignty, in fact, is gone in many ways, in different ways. Or sometimes it's more regulated, like the sovereignty of the European states in the European Union. We know that it's not a shared constitution, a shared sovereignty. After the crisis in Greece, we know that it allows for protectorates in Europe. So it's not so much that debate. The debate now is between popular sovereignty and state sovereignty. The idea that the political struggle would be, and here again is going to be some things in which some of the popular classes and social movements come to positions that seem Trump-like. That in a sense is the idea that democracy is not about state diplomacy, but state sovereignty, but popular sovereignty, so the people. So the idea that, for instance, in order to make some of these laws actually applied, the mechanisms of the judicial system and representative democracy are not enough. So we should complement them with participatory democracy, for instance. That's why the constitution in Bolivia states that there are three forms of democracy, and the three of them should be respected: representative, participatory, and communitarian. So I think it is this idea of going from the state to the popular, to the people in a sense, which again is a tricky trend because of populism and so on. So you have to be very careful there. But you know, it's worthwhile a debate. But that is the only one. Once you do this, then these things that you just mentioned, of the children and so on, it's everywhere you see, because sometimes it's not even a foreign state imposition, it's a foreign NGO. I mean, the NGOs we live under a form of angiocracy or angiocracy, oncracia in Portuguese, angiocracy in English, that in fact they are the ones that in fact bring, I found in my work that there were 3 systems of public water in Mozambique in 1980s, only because the international NGOs that divided the country in 3, the Norwegians in the north, the Dutch in the middle, and the French in the south, and each one had his own style of distributing water. So the country didn't exist because each one of them brought their ideas. So the idea is that you have to, the base had to be the people, the sovereign people, and this could be also the community that would solve the problems and so on. And that's, for instance, the children. The problem, colleague, is not so much that they don't have school, is that they are peasants' economies where the children were always part of the family. It was not the children exploitation. It's even more complicated because it's intercultural. The children that lived in the family, working in the fields, going out, go to the indigenous community today in the end and say, you are exploiting your children. It's much more complex because it's the training of the children for life, the mysteries of the Pachamama, the Mother Earth. You cannot teach them in school. You teach in the field when we see the seeds, when we see the river. This river is sacred. We have to be there. It cannot be taught in school. That's why the Zapatistas, once they develop as escuelitas, they bring the children and the parents in the school. It's the only system I know in which both, for 2 weeks, 1 month, every year, children and parents are together in the school. So it's a different way of looking at reality. I think that these questions are lots of intercultural issues here, and I think that we could go from there if you money to schools, not interfere with, not introducing, for instance, in India, the Green Revolution that destroyed the variety of peasants. Peasants become more indebted, so they have to use more work, more children, and so on. So there are lots of things that interrelate with that, and your question makes all sense, of course. As to Gabriela, well, I know where you come from, and we are very good common friends, and precisely I've discussed a lot with Armando on these questions of bilingual education and intercultural education, and yes, in this Alice project, he has a chapter precisely on this issue, because he's a great expert on this. Well, we have 2 positions in Ecuador on this, and I think that I respect both of them, even though they are very different. One is the radical indigenous position that says that plurinationality is a Western rendition of an indigenous idea, summa causa or whatever, and the moment you put it in a constitution, you disfigure it, you destroy it. I have a student of mine, is an indigenous leader in Ecuador, Raul Yazag, that is writing a thesis in which, in fact, they criticize my position. And I'm supervisor, but it's interesting to see this tension, because I was in favor of introducing these things in the Constitution of Montecristo, and he's against. Because they say you lose the spirituality of the concept, you lose the cosmovision of the Indians. So we are putting something that is precious to us in the hands of the mestizos and whites, basically. Well, I respect that. But this has been leading to the isolation of the indigenous movements and communities in these countries, more and more. Look at what happened to the Pachakutik. Look at how many people got involved in Pachakutik that were not indigenous. Today, you see the indigenous people closing themselves to protect themselves, but at the same time committing sometimes lots of mistakes. On my point of view, I don't know if you saw my recent state of mind around the elections in Ecuador. I got really frightened when I saw CONAI on the first moment in the coronary, almost suggesting that the people should vote in Guillermo Lasso, in a banker. Indigenous voting in a banker must be the desperation of everything. How can you rely on promises by bankers after the speculation, financial speculation in Europe, Latin America, everywhere? This must be a situation of disaster. So I felt myself in the position of writing this document that has been distributed. That, Lasso, for instance, Lasso promised that the EU would never exploit oil in the Asuni, which is one of the main contentions. Well, if he can do that, Lenin Moreno could do that promise again, and I would probably trust more Lenin Moreno than Guillermo Lasso. A banker, I don't trust bankers. That's my position. I don't trust them. Well, most of bankers in my country, they are not in prison, because prisons are made for poor people, but they should be. So the second position is the position that I've been defending. It's not a lost cause. I think history, as Sartre once said, history has an infinite patience. We don't, because our lives are short. So we want things to be implemented. The fact that the indigenous movement inscribes in the Constitution concepts like Pachamama, concepts like Summa Causa, the Article 71 of your Constitution, today has a worldwide impact. I mean, beyond, probably not much in Ecuador at this point, of course. But I tend to be an internationalist. I think that the things that are good for indigenous people are good not just for them, are good for all of us. For instance, protection of the Pachamama, protection of rivers. Is it good just for indigenous? No, it's good for all of us. So, and look at this irony, Gabriel, is that it failed completely. The Article 71 is not in the agenda for Correa. But look at last week that New Zealand decided to give rights to a river in New Zealand. Do you see the connection? So finally, rivers have human rights. So that's what the Constitution says, Article 71. So I think that history is very complex in this. So I tend not to agree with the first position, tend to agree with the second, and we have to build that. But there are things in which it went worse. I mean, there was the contradiction. In terms of intercultural education, there was more intercultural education before Correa than now. Because at the time, there were the indigenous peoples and associations that governed the intercultural education. Now is the state. And the state created these millennium schools with computer. Well, you know all that story. And you cannot have computers and all these things in all the villages in the Andean mountains. So that's why they concentrate children and bring them for 40, 50 kilometers. It's a disaster. So it's a caricature what's happening in Ecuador. But we cannot give up. I mean, the idea in itself of plurinationality is strong. And in Bolivia, you have 11 communities that decided to create their own constitution. And they are now living by those constitutions.
Thank you. Alicia?
I wanted to ask from the perspective of constitutional transition, and I tend to agree that it's a moment where there's law is quite absent. We're between one legal order and another legal order, and we're in the field of fact, which left a lot of space for different external constraints and foreign powers, as you said. I think now peace building has become the new way to enter, we see that in many peace treaty agreements, and there's a shift in the understanding of sovereignty, thinking that if we must have peace, sovereignty becomes a bit secondary. So from that perspective, democracy becomes, there's also a big input of international NGO, as you say, NGOcracy. There's a recent work from Lefranc or Rowan that talk about the idea of transitional justice used by actors to advance political gains. So democracy becomes a bit like this as well in transition. So I wanted to know, what do you understand by democracy? You've started to talk about it, but what would be your idea of democracy? Because it can be taken by so many actors in many different ways to defense different interests. And I also wanted to ask you, if we couldn't think of a law that would protect these external constraints, so to preserve the sovereignty, but what type of law? Because international law, we know it's been written by white males and it's deeply colonial. So what type of law or rules could we think to, yeah.
Alicia.
Yes.
So,
Alicia, I'm a PhD.
well, Alicia, we are in a difficult moment in which capitalism is not afraid of its enemies anymore. There was a time in which capitalism was afraid, not only of the trade unions and movements and so on, but it was afraid of Soviet Union, because on the other side there were lots of countries that had a different model of organization. And until 1989, now we can see very clearly that that division was crucial. I mean, the worst thing that happened to all of us these days, in my view today, was the end of the Cold War. Because that wall was precious. You know, it's so tragic to say this. I mean, it's so difficult. I lived for a while in West Berlin, and my girlfriend lived in East Berlin. I lived in the West, and she lived in the East. And that's why I could never become a Marxist then, because I could see what the situation in East Berlin was really Stalinism of the worst kind. You'd smuggle things. There was, scarcity of everything, chocolate, all kinds of cigarettes and so on. So for me, if this is socialism, I don't want to be a socialist. I was very young then. But we have to see that, historically speaking, the idea that there was an alternative to capitalism, that what made social democracy in Europe possible. That's why when the wall came to an end, it was not just Soviet socialism that got destroyed. Social democracy began to be destroyed. I think that since then, they are not afraid of enemies. They do all kinds of things. So today we see Oxfam telling us in Davos that the 8 richest men have as much wealth as the poorest half of the world population, 3.5 billion people, and nothing happens. No revolution, no turmoil, and so on. So I think this is our time, and that's why when capitalism gets stronger, colonialism gets stronger as well, and patriarchy also. That's why violence against women is become rampant in spite of all the feminist movements of the world. So if this is realistic, the way I mentioned, then how can we fight these things, right? Well, armed struggle is out. I mean, we began the 20th century with 2 models of social transformation, revolution and reformism. And we start the 21st century without none, neither revolution nor reformism. And law was crucial for reformism. That's what can law be emancipatory, is the idea, law and reformism. And that's why I'm in trouble with my own concept. And I have to reformulate it. So I think the struggle is going to be more political. And Jean de Monk just said what had to be said. In transition, politics is more important. And I think that we should abandon at this stage legal fetishism, because it will be very dangerous. Legal fetishism is what they like in the UN and so on, and whenever it is convenient, because sometimes it's not legal fetishism, as I say, it's protocol fetishism or standards fetishism, right? I think politics, and in probably if it is politics, there is nothing else than radicalize democracy, I think, revolutionize democracy. Probably that's what we need. My definition of democracy, for you have in my texts for a long time, I define democracy as any process of transformation of power and an equal power relation into relations of shared authority. Whenever there is an equal power and a transformation into shared authority, I see democratic. Could be in the company, could be in the family, in the public sphere, on the streets, in the schools, in the universities. So I think I don't think there is democracy. I think there are democratization processes. Democracy is an ideal type in a sense. But we could really strengthen democracy. That's why I celebrate and I use in my work all these ideas that come from the Global South. Pay attention to the first book in Spanish in ACAL. It's called Demodiversidad, is the book on democracy that we bring out of our project. And we bring, you come with lots of interesting ideas about democracy coming from the Global South. Forms of participatory democracy, communitarian democracy, and so on. I think that we have to radicalize democracy. The problem is that democracy is a small island in an archipelago of despotisms. So we have a little bit of democracy in the parliament. The family is despotic, the street is despotic, the companies are despotic, and very often the rest of society is very despotic. Bring in more democracy. That's probably what we are left with at the beginning. The young people at the beginning of the 20th century didn't have this weapon. Democracy was so elitist. It was at the time just for owners of property. Women were also thought that. It was not in the popular imagination. Now it is. That's why the Indignados start with real democracy. And the Arab Spring also real democracy, not this one. This is not democracy, something else.
My name is Santiago. I'm doing here a PhD, but I prefer to talk in Spanish because it's really important for me to say everything that I want in my own words.
Absolutely.
Yo veo en su intervención algo que extraño, y es que cuando habla de la tensión entre transición y violencia, o sea, la relación entre transición y violencia no se analiza cuando hay procesos que se están imaginando otras formas de organizar lo común. Y ahí hay en las experiencias y en las teorías críticas dos salidas, o al menos dos que yo encuentro. O sea, unos quienes conciben la transición hacia otra forma de vida en común por la vía de la violencia. Y ahí es lo que usted asociaba con la primera fuente, ¿cierto? O sea, quienes consideran que derecho es violencia. Marx, Fanon, etcétera, que lo que plantean es que hay un momento necesario en donde hay que ejercer la violencia para transformar la sociedad en un plano de transición. Pero también hay una segunda fuente que es, por ejemplo, Gandhi. Pero ambas, o sea, Gandhi lo que plantea es una transformación de la sociedad y el planteamiento de una transición a partir del uso radical de la no violencia. Uh-huh. Pero bien sea una u otra postura, lo que niegan es el Estado. Porque a través del Estado no se puede hacer la transición hacia otra forma de vida en común, porque el Estado es una modalización de la violencia, que es lo que usted plantea cuando afirma la tesis positivista. O sea, por ejemplo, quien acepta la tesis weberiana, o sea, el Estado es la forma de la violencia legítima que se garantiza cuando una parte de la sociedad ejerce la violencia para garantizar los derechos del conjunto de la sociedad. ¿Cómo resolver el problema de la violencia mientras exista Estado? Y desde ahí viene la segunda pregunta, o sea, ¿cómo garantizar las distintas fuentes del derecho? Las distintas fuentes que provienen del derecho cuando al final terminan siendo construidas desde el derecho constitucional que proviene de un lugar de enunciación, que es lo que usted llama el occidente. Esas dos preguntas a mí me vienen porque en Latinoamérica hemos encontrado que el derecho es una forma de lucha, pero no emancipatoria, o sea, amplía las posibilidades para construir proyectos emancipatorios. Porque ahí viene, por ejemplo, la crítica de Carl Schmitt. Carl Schmitt lo que les decía a quienes creían que con la Constitución iban a transformar la sociedad es que hay regímenes que defienden principios materiales. Es decir, yo no creo que desde el derecho se pueda transformar el colonialismo, que desde el derecho se pueda transformar el heteropatriarcado, ni desde el derecho se pueda transformar el capitalismo. Por eso existe el derecho de propiedad, y si cambiara el derecho de propiedad ya no estaríamos hablando de una forma de organizar lo común que es esta. Ahora, el derecho sí amplía posibilidades y no es una tensión ni una falsa dicotomía entre reforma o revolución como planteaba, por ejemplo, Lenin, sino de buscar horizontes para pensar otras formas posibles, pero el derecho también tiene límites estructurales para pensar la emancipación. Era eso.
Pequeñas preguntas, ¿eh?
Bueno, muy bien. ¿Dónde vienes? ¿De México? No.
De Colombia.
Ah, de Colombia.
Sí, yo soy colombiano. Bueno, también quería hablar del proceso de paz, pero me lo guardo.
Mejor no ahora.
Otra
Mejor
vez.
no ahora. ¿Quieres que responda?
Sí.
Mira, buenas preguntas. Claro, yo por eso te pregunté si venías de Colombia, de México, porque...
Maybe in English? Is
Ah,
it better for... I think English is
Oh,
better
yeah.
for the...
Oh, yeah, I
yes,
forgot.
so that you can
Yes.
take back the
Well,
questions.
yeah. No, I'm not going to say anything about this dichotomy because I agree with you. I'm also been writing about that between Fanon and Gandhi and so on. And this is, you are right. I mean, these are the two possibilities. The problem is how to uncouple law and the state. And in fact, in the Westphalian system, it is difficult to uncouple it. You have to understand that we started international law as not being real law because even though it was more law created by the states, but because of the coercion aspect of it, because of sovereignty, because it was unconditional. So I think that the problem that you are raising is a very serious problem, and a problem that is in the social movements today, and in the struggles, and in Mexico is very strong, given the importance of the Zapatistas. Is two issues that usually get conflated. One is the question of power. Is it important to take power or not? I mean, John Holloway, so the debates. I mean, you can't transform the world without taking power. Well, I don't buy that. I think that we have to take over power, but we have to transform it and take it in the process of transforming it and transform it in the process of taking it. But it's very complicated to do that, but I never agreed with John Holloway on this. What I think I do, and you can see that in my work, is what I call the liberated zones. There is no today more and more expression of forms of organization outside the state. And they are autonomous. The Zapatistas, of course, gave great visibility to this, but there are other forms today of stateless type of organization throughout. And this can be expanded. The great problem that this faces is the following, is that once you have these initiatives, how do we aggregate them? So that's what we call the scale problem. So how you solve the scale problem? For instance, we have, and continues to exist, and they are very important, all the juntas de buen gobierno y los caracoles de Chiapas. But it didn't go beyond the 38 communities. I mean, they are still the same. It's impossible. And if you go to Guerrero and if you go to Oaxaca, the indigenous people don't want that. And they have other forms. For instance, in Cheran, which is a case because a student of mine also did a dissertation on this, in Cheran, they managed to change the Constitution of Mexico to have a municipality that is elected according to indigenous law, not according to state law. The state in Mexico, they said, well, if you are not elected according to state law, we cannot give you money. Funds from the state. That's what they said to the Zapatistas. And the Zapatistas said, no money. We don't want money, any money from the state, because it comes with conditions. The guys in Cheran went to the Constitutional Court, and they won. So today they have funds from the state, and they are. So it's a fabulous case. So the problem is that, I mean, if you are closed in the West, I like that all of us come to the West to study, but the real interesting things are happening outside Europe. And the problem is that we have in our universities, and that's our responsibility in Europe. That's why I'm here, because this is a progressive university and people that are very concerned with realities there, and they are working with outside. Because in most universities, you don't find this that you find. I was in Berlin or even in Holland 2 weeks ago, and really it looks like all the concepts that are prevalent in Europe are valid for this. while Europe is so poor now in new ideas of transformation, no? That in fact learning comes from the outside, but then should be more horizontal. We should have more exchanges about our colleagues outside and not just students. And because I think that we are at a profound crisis in the global north. It has really also economic reasons. I'm a Marxist in that, I'm a materialist in that. I mean, for the first time, the dynamics of the global capitalism is outside Europe and the United States. Is in the East. We know that, right? Mm-hmm. And we know that all of them, they talk about Russia, about them. They are frightened to that with China, basically that. That's why probably Rafael Correa has to go, because the only investment that he gets in Ecuador is from Chinese, and the Americans do not allow Chinese investment in America. They want to replace that. And they are doing the same with Nicaragua and so on. So I think that the law, when we say cannot transform capitalism, no. But again, we are talking about state law, because if state is capitalist, I'm not expecting that state is going to be anti-capitalist. What I'm saying is that everything is contradictory in capitalism. So the state is also capitalist, and therefore is contradictory. Since I've noticed that you know a little bit about the state and Marxism, then I'll tell you that I'm with Lenin, not with Kautsky in this. I may not agree with Lenin in many things, of course, but Kautsky, as you know, had the idea that the state is neutral and can occupied by the workers. Well, Lenin has a different understanding. I think Lenin was much better sociologist of law of state than Kautsky, even though Kautsky was such an important intellectual and activist. So I think that we have to see that we are going to enter a period which I define as a mixture of extra-institutionality and institutionality, institutions and extra-institutions. We are going to see more people on the streets, strikes, the streets and the plazas of our world are going to be, once in a while, is uneven and combined, some would say. But you see people on the street sometimes, and you have seen them in Mexico recently, you have seen them in Colombia, and we are going to see them everywhere. I don't know how long or what it will be the future. Could be chaos. We don't know. I mean, it's impossible to. History is contingent. I mean, it's really contingent. We never know. But that's the stakes.
Je vais m'attribuer la parole ici parce que j'aimerais brancher une question sur la question précédente qui concerne le rapport à la non-violence. Parce que dans votre conférence, vous avez effectivement traité tous les termes de la demande pour aujourd'hui, et vraiment nous vous en sommes très reconnaissants. Mais la question de la non-violence en tant que telle, j'ai l'impression, n'a pas été complètement traitée. C'est-à-dire que justement, dans une tradition qui n'est peut-être pas typiquement occidentale, justement, la supériorité d'un mouvement de transformation sociale vraiment profond est pensée comme découlant d'une attitude radicale de non-violence. Quelle est là, est-ce que ça a une place dans ce que vous voyez aujourd'hui comme mouvement prometteur? Comment penser justement cet enjeu de la non-violence, évidemment, face à un État dans lequel sont enquistées des formes de violence? Voilà, j'aimerais vous entendre un peu là-dessus.
Yeah, probably the violence, whenever it is institutionalized, looks like peace and non-violence. I think that violence in our understanding, the dominant understanding, is really something non-institutional, and in most of the literature on transitions, violence is always physical violence, basically physical violence. Maybe is spoken about other forms of violence, but if you take the literature in Latin America. Many authors, Briceno, my colleague from Venezuela, Gomes Briceno Leon. There is a book precisely on violence and in Latin America, and they distinguish by 6 or 7 kinds of violence. So the physical violence, psychological violence, symbolic violence, structural violence, historical violence. So I think that we can work out different typologies and the hermeneutics of violence that would enrich. But when we read the Fanon and counterpose Fanon with Arendt, for instance, you can see they are basically talking about physical violence. Mm-hmm. But when you reach the last chapter in Fanon, The Wretch of the Earth, what you see is that Fanon, because he's a psychiatrist, and a psychiatrist, at the end, what he says is the impact on the blacks, the population that fights against colonialism, the impact on their own minds. So the anomalies, the psychiatric anomalies, that is to say, there was physical violence, but there's now psychological violence. And he has a beautiful, probably one of the most brilliant essays by him, 1962, on the African syndrome, in which he says basically that it was published in a Catholic university journal, L'Esprit. He says that basically the Africans do not have individual symptoms. Their symptoms and their syndromes of neurosis, particularly and depression, are collective. It's the people that is oppressed. It's the people that is depressed. It's the people that is neurotic. And these are just because of the oppression, colonial oppression. So there are different forms of violence, and I think we put up with so much. I mean, mediatic violence, visual violence these days. I think that this would be a fabulous topic to discuss more on phenomenology of violence, particularly because of what does not seem to be violent because we are used to it, or because you think that we don't deserve better. That's what some reports by feminists about the women, it was most difficult to read, but some research done in some areas that women say, well, we don't deserve better. We are beaten up by our husbands or whatever because they don't deserve better. So this is terrible. So deserved violence, justified violence, the victim justifying violence against the victim. Well, it's not so new, and it happens everywhere. And we saw, for instance, if you torture someone, what is torture? Torture is just physical violence or psychological violence? Of course, it's psychological violence. And you can torture people to an extent that they change their mind and then they voluntarily give whatever you want. I mean, you cannot even say that you are forcing him. I think I advise all of you, go to the Google, because everything is in the Google now. I don't have to ask you to read certain books, but one of the greatest intellectuals in the Russian Revolution, assassinated by Stalin, 1936, Nikolai Bukharin. Bukharin was the great economist, companion of Lenin, of his life. And read his biography that someone wrote for him. It's dramatic. After torture and so on, the guy gave, fabulous speeches in favor of Stalin and saying everything that he had contradicted in the past. So we have seen that in Abu Ghraib, we have seen everywhere. So I think that violence, as it is used in your titles, is too simple, and you are right. I didn't address, and I know why I didn't address it. It's because I would have started that, I would be going on as I would go on now, just dealing with violence. I wouldn't ever address the other topics, because this is the topic. Is violence in our societies, particularly violence that does not look like violence, which is the banalization of a horror that we live every day. I mean, you see all these awful pictures on television, but after that comes a good announcement, advertisement of a vacation in the Caribbean islands, and you forgot already about the atrocities So banalization of horror is what we have today.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Vamos, segundo.
Lo siento, pero la voy a hacer en español. Yo planteo un miedo, ¿no? Yo creo que no es una pregunta, es un miedo, y es la sensación de que a lo mejor de lo que estamos hablando llega un momento que su único papel es ser una teoría crítica dentro del ámbito universitario, de la academia, ¿no? Porque en relación a lo que decía el compañero y lo que ha trabajado Boaventura, no es lo mismo la teoría que la práctica, y no es lo mismo la praxis que la elaboración teórica, ¿no? Y creo que existe, que es parte del trabajo de Boaventura, mucha praxis que construye teoría, y que es la praxis que construye teoría la que desde mi punto de vista está poniendo en movimiento transformaciones reales. Transformaciones que no son violentas, pero sí tienen una capacidad de incidencia. El problema es si nosotros tenemos la capacidad de reconocer esas transformaciones o de visualizarlas, o nos quedamos en el nivel de vanguardia todavía, de elaborar la teoría, como decía la compañera de Ecuador, ¿no? Olvidando realmente el trabajo que está poniendo eso sobre la mesa, ¿no? Y en ese sentido hay una anécdota de Pirrón, el escéptico, ¿no? Que se va a la India a investigar y a conocer sobre los sabios de la India, ¿no? Entonces se sienta enfrente a un sabio indio y dicen, bueno, vamos a dialogar y vamos a aprender los dos. Y el tema que plantean es el dolor. Vamos a hablar del dolor. Y Pirrón se tira durante media hora elaborando una teoría sobre el dolor, y el sabio indio, una vez que acaba Pirrón, se prende fuego. Pirrón desde ese momento dijo que no iba a hablar nunca más. Y creo que muchas veces tenemos que tener cuidado si estamos construyendo una teoría que legitima un status quo, o estamos empujando una práctica que empuja una transformación de la realidad, ¿no? Y no sé si en ese lo siento, me he extendido, pero Boa, yo tengo un miedo en ese nivel, porque creo que Bolívar Echeverría, ¿no? En el libro de la teoría de la cultura, cuando él compara la comunicación y el consumo a nivel material y a nivel del lenguaje, muchas veces si nosotros nos estamos olvidando del consumo y la reproducción material, y estamos manteniéndonos en la construcción única del consumo y la reproducción de la comunicación. Y creo que hay una diferencia clara entre el concepto de praxis como reflexión teórica, pero desde la práctica, y el concepto de teoría como aquel lenguaje que solo habla del lenguaje, pero que olvida las cosas, ¿no? Y a mí me produce cierto miedo en algunas ocasiones, ¿eh? Lo siento. Désolé, sorry.
No, segundo tiene la razón. ¿Quieres que conteste en inglés?
Si, la question porte sur une crainte d'une discussion qui oublierait les enjeux et la prise sur la praxis en tant que réalité, et qui construirait un discours sur plutôt que d'être en prise avec. Voilà, bon, c'est l'enjeu de construire une théorie critique du point de vue de l'intérieur de la vie universitaire, qui a effectivement une série de contraintes, mais on va écouter là.
No, I think that Segundo Tercero is a good friend, and I was so glad to see him here. We have been in struggles for a long time in things. He used to be in Spain, and we organized the Popular University of Social Movements, and Segundo has been a compañero hace mucho tiempo. And I hope that he finds it well here in Belgium. And Louvain-la-Neuve is a good place, you can see that. So if you are here for your life, go on, because you are a fabulous person and a human being. And but all fabulous human beings today in our societies, without a PhD, without these things, is always difficult, right? And without knowing English, that's also, no? So Segundo now is learning English and French very strongly. Now, Segundo, you coming from you, of course, I know that miedo, fear always comes, as all of us are Spinozists, come with hope. That is to say, it's impossible to have fear without hope, because without hope, cynicism, and we cannot afford to be cynical, I think. I think that what you pose, the question you pose, is that the renewal of the energy for progressive social transformation does not come from theories. Mm-hmm. But because I think we have following my work very closely, and you know my writings about rearguard intellectual, not vanguard intellectuals. We are at the best of rearguard. We go behind the movements, facilitating, but never telling the right direction or whatever. It's the praxis in the movements that tells us, and sometimes the conquests, the victories are very small, but they are so crucial for that community, for a community that is about to be destroyed, to be saved. Is a great, is not utopia, is not socialism, is not communism, is not nothing. But at least that community stays in place, protected this land, this river, whatever. I think that we are at a stage in which all this has to be done. And in fact, the universities are very ill-suited in general for this, because this what we are having here is very rare, because any universities usually think exclusively with the knowledge of the winners in the struggles, never with the losers. Well, the winners have been the colonialists, the capitalists, and the patriarchals. So the ones that suffer with them never reach the university. Their knowledge has never reached. Now you can see that there are some philosophers, women philosophers, finally, because the feminist movement draws the attention. Now we can read finally Fanon, and Fanon is a small piece and very controversial, because you have so many others that you can bring in. I start my class in sociology today with Ibn Khaldun. He's from 14th century and born in an Islamic founder of the social sciences. So there's so much new that can be done in Europe, but Europe is still closed in a colonial prejudice. The idea that we are more developed and therefore have nothing to learn from the outside world. And as long as you do that, my last piece, probably you saw that in Spanish, is that Europe has to go back to the school of the world, but this time as a student, not as a professor.
Yes, please.
En continuant l'idée, parce qu'il y a une idée qui m'a fortement intéressée dans votre travail, qu'on la trouve en épistémologie du Sud et après dans certains articles. Vous parlez de l'expérimentalisme politique et associé aussi au pluralisme juridique, mais je me demande, ça me mène à une autre question. Est-ce que, quand on parle de l'expérimentalisme politique comme une expérience que vous mettez en valeur la présence de l'imagination comme un élément émancipateur, est-ce qu'on pourrait penser à partir de là à la possibilité de repenser pas seulement la reformulation, par exemple, de l'État, sinon une transformation profonde et radicale que nous amène à arrêter de penser à l'État comme la seule et au droit comme la seule forme d'organisation et la seule forme de maintenir une communauté, et penser au-delà de cette expérience qui fonde l'État, d'autres formes d'organisation communautaire. Vous avez mentionné aussi les cas, par exemple, de zapatisme, l'organisation à Chiapas, les caracoles. Il y a toujours un moment, je pense, dans ce type d'expérience, qui tourne les dos, je ne sais pas comment dire, dans l'espalda, on dirait, à l'État et à l'organisation. Un moment où on voit que ce type d'organisation qu'on a porté disparaître pour donner après naissance à une autre forme d'organisation. Est-ce qu'on ne pourrait pas penser, pousser jusqu'aux dernières conséquences cette idée de l'expérimentalisme politique pour penser aussi la possibilité de sortir de cette expérience qui dans notre imaginaire se maintient comme à mon avis, d'après moi, comme la seule forme d'organisation l'État, je veux dire, même si est national.
Quel est ton nom?
Miriam, je m'appelle Miriam, oui.
Miriam, ¿qué prefieres? ¿Que hable en español o en inglés? ¿Inglés bien?
Sí, yo creo que sí.
Podría intentar hacerlo en francés, pero vemos cómo estoy mejorando mi francés. Intentar el desafío. Miriam, in each epoch, I think that we struggle with weapons that are available to us. I mean, it's very difficult to invent new weapons because we have an horizon of possibilities and you can't really imagine things. I usually say that we don't choose our struggles choose us. You are in a given context, you are in your community, we are here, we are in your family, and all of a sudden something comes up. If this is my struggle, I have to work for this. I feel indignant, and I think I should do something. So if you look at the people that in fact try to do something for the better of the society outside the university, outside research centers, they come up with situations, existential situations that decide. And they experiment also with the possibilities by doing that. At our present time, which are the conditions for political imagination? I think that political imagination is basically the idea of not reducing reality to what exists in a dominant way. Something else is what I call following block, the not yet, the noch nicht, the emergence, etc. You have been very focused on that idea because I think that's what we can see. But the emergences are things that are possible historically speaking. Now, what is historically speaking today is impossible is precisely what comes from your intervention. The state seems to be an endangered species, in a sense. If we look at the genealogy of this, now we come from the Westphalian, the state, and then the crisis. All of us discussed it. I come from Berlin. That was what comes after the state. That was the title of the conference. What comes after the state? So the state is an endangered species. But what is the genealogy of that? Well, there were several genealogies. I mean, in a sense, the 18 Brumaire of Marx already with the Commune of Paris. Paris was the end of the state, a different state. Then State and Revolution in Lenin, of course. The anarchists, Bakunin and others, they felt that we could organize society outside the state form, right? But from 1980s onward, the critique of the state came from the right, neoliberalism. When the IMF and the World Bank write those reports, the state as a predator, the state as inefficient, everything has to go to the market, then all these European rich countries transform their development assistance from money to the states to money to the NGOs, to the civil society, which they create themselves. Fake, in many cases, fake civil society, because sometimes it was the first lady organized. I saw that in Mozambique. The first lady of Mozambique organized an NGO because the money does not come to the government, it comes to the first lady. So then corruption all over the place and so on and so forth, right? But they like, because in the reports of the NGOs, the money went to civil society, and that's enough for the state to continue to fund. Now we are at a stage in which the critique of the state was also part of our critique on the left. I mean, internationalism, the capitalist state, the colonial state, and so on. So we are at a juncture in which the state is being disputed by rightist people. The extreme right, on the contrary, is leading to the strengthening of the repressive state. So we go on talking about the state, but we are changing what we mean by the state. Because it's not the protective state the security, the facilitative state is the repressive state. That's what the extreme right wants. Strengthen. That's why Trump increases 10% the military budget. For the largest military budget in the world, I mean, more than all the other military budgets combined. So it is this securitarian type of the state that is disfiguring it. So the state is the repression to be strong enough to confront all the rebellions that are going to emerge out of this polarization of wealth in the world. That's how I see it. They have to strengthen because they know that this is going to be a period of unrest. My favorite reports come from the CIA. I read all of them because they are the ones about the future. Because they know what they are doing, and what they are doing is not always their predictions come true, but they know that we are entering a period of the internal enemy. It means turmoil, strikes and so on and so forth. So they want to be so. Now again, I come with a lot of the same contradiction. On one side, we have to fight against the state. On the other side, the state is still the entity that protects some rights. And I don't like to do this in discussions. Now in Brazil, let's see, we are in a... What are you going to do? The state is privatizing everything. But what we want to do is to change the politics so that the state returns with rights. So we don't have in our society any entity comparable to the state that can guarantee rights, particularly in social and economic rights. Because outside the state, we have philanthropy, which is not even generous philanthropy, because the philanthropes make lots of money out of philanthropy because they don't pay taxes. It's deductible. It's business for them. But, everywhere in America, everything depends on philanthropy. If you want a public radio, public television, it's funded by all the philanthropes. So I think that experimentalism is going to be in different directions, against state, outside the state, and with the state. And I can tell you more on this. Beyond this, depends on the context, the concrete context. I think that it would be wrong if you would not fight for the social clause in Europe, for the social economic rights in Europe. It would be wrong because they are state. Well, no, we have to do that with state. We have to go against state when the state is become corrupt and become illegal, and the production of illegality and so on. And we have to create liberated zones outside the state. We have to do that at the same time. What happens to our tradition of critical thinking is that you favor one type and you transform it into the only type of struggle. And we have to do that at the same time. It's like the bourgeoisie have always done that. They comply with the law when it is convenient. When it is not convenient, they don't comply. And they do this and that. When there was a crisis of liberalism, what do the crisis of liberalism immediately do? Reduce democratic rights. For instance, the crisis in Europe 2008, well, they could have reduced the military budget. But no, they reduce health, education, and social security. Always like that, everywhere, right? So I think that they are flexible in the ways they operate. I think we have to do the same. And we have been very fetishistic about the state in many ways.
Ouais, merci beaucoup. Est-ce qu'il y a encore l'une ou l'autre dernière question où nous avons... On a bien travaillé. Jean, encore une dernière question. Oui.
Non, mais...
Oui, on a le temps.
Si on a le temps.
Oui,
If you are not too tired. Okay. Well, I believe this question of the state is a very important question at the moment. And but I disagree with people who identify exclusively the state with the monopoly of violence. Of course, it's a good definition. It's obvious it's important in a society to know who gets not the violence, but the legitimate violence. But the state is much more than that. It's the first way to accumulate capital. The first way to aggregate money, to have common investment projects. And thus an economic aspect of the state which is much as important than violence, because it's the only way to have another economic power than the capital aggregated via the market. It means capitalism. And that's the reason why the debt is a very, very bad situation, because it's a way to weaken this aspect of the state. The way, my parents, in my life, I mean, I have a bit more than 50, 55. Then, well, I have never seen a state able to invest in an innovative project since the 80s. We have weakened states unable to do anything on the political level since 30 years in Europe. The generation of my parents lived in a state able to innovate in social fields, in educational fields, in social security after the war. But after that, in my life, there is no possibility, no opportunity to imagine another way to live, because we lack money. We lack money. We are in a permanent crisis, in permanent debt, with austerity measures. Always, I haven't met in my life course, never a state able to do something new. Then it means that at the economic level, it's not a question of violence. It's the question of money and of economic power. Then I believe that if we are not able to find a new way to generate funding for the state, any project of democracy is only a dream, an utopia, but not a reality. Then I believe we must take that into account. It's not only the question of violence, and then to overcome the state because of violence, maybe, but it's legitimate violence. But the question of money, we must deal with that. And the reciprocity, the third way Polanyi is identified, reciprocity of communities, gift and so on. Well, it's always local, obviously. It's not possible to imagine that a community with gifts and even with reciprocity and open minds and so on can change something in the power of capitalist enterprises. It's impossible because they lack the money they need. Then I believe that we must take care not to weaken in the critical theory the idea of the state. And I'm frightened, because in South America, in Europe, in America, we meet always some people criticizing the state and the power of the state and the ambivalence of the state, and we must overcome the state and so on. Well, that's a dead end, I believe, because I don't know any other means to have a political will able to act.
Okay, do you want to add a last word on this?
No, I don't want last words.
Okay, so there is no last word. Indeed, you're right, perfectly right. Then I'm going to close our afternoon together now. Merci beaucoup à tout le monde. Muchas gracias. On a démarré cette première séance de séminaire pour une année qui va être passionnante puisqu'on vous donne rendez-vous pour un autre moment très intense le 12 mai où nous continuerons à approfondir ces questions dans le champ spécifique de l'économie, violence et non-violence in the economy, avec Étienne Balibar et Nancy Fraser. Ça sera à Bruxelles. Nous vous avez normalement laissé votre mail a Armand, mais si ce n'est pas le cas, veuillez nos dar sus email, así que podemos mandar la información. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor.